This is Dateline News and Conversation. My guest is returning for the second time, Robert Morningstar. Robert, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Well, you're welcome. I'm happy to have you. There's a lot to talk about today, an awful lot. Probably can't cover it all in 1 hour, so we'll try to be selective. And of course, I hope to have you back on again in another week or so and follow up on some things that are moving very rapidly. First of all, the really big news 5 days ago, Bakhmut, or now it's called Artyomovsk in Russian, because it is in Russian hands. Uh,
hmm
this was a catastrophic defeat for Ukraine, more than symbolic, more than just public relations. What's your take over there in the United States on the fall of Bakhmut? What does it mean? And in your opinion, Robert, what is next?
Well, to make a historic analogy, I would say that Bakhmut is analogous to Stalingrad. When the Nazis lost the Battle of Stalingrad, that was the end of the Fourth or the Third Reich. So the historical analogy is apropos because we have been fighting Nazis in Ukraine. People were saying neo-Nazis, and I said, look, you don't know the history of Ukraine. You don't know about Stephen Banderas. You don't know about the collaboration of Ukrainian Nazis in World War II and the Waffen SS with the German Nazis. So don't call these guys neo-Nazis. Their grandfathers were Nazis. Their fathers were Nazis. And these guys are Nazis. So they're Nazis. They're not neo-Nazi anything. It's so I've been watching the Fall of Bakhmut for several months. So, and I listened to a truth teller named Colonel McGregor, who appears on Redacted and a couple of other, very good alternate media sites. Stephen Gardner has him regularly, and he just tells you the truth. And we've been watching the dissemination of the Ukrainian army. The real statistics are that the Ukrainians have been losing 6 or 7 to 1 against the Russians. Saw the obliteration of a munition depot a couple of, I guess it was about 2 weeks ago in Khmelnytsky. That thing went up like an A-bomb. When I saw it, I said, I haven't seen an explosion like that since Hiroshima. And I wasn't far off from the truth because it was a depot for Leopard tank ammunition and fuel. And when it was hit by hypersonic missiles from Russia, I saw, as I said, you know, we talk about the mother of all bombs here in the United States when we hit Iraq with these bunker busters. But I haven't seen anything like that, the mushroom cloud. And now the radiation levels are going up all around Khmelnytsky because the depot had depleted uranium ammunition. And I've been told from reliable sources in the Pentagon that they suspected that Britain had snuck in 2 tactical nuclear weapons into Khmelnytsky, and they just thank God that they didn't detonate. But the radiation levels are going up all around. So the myth of Ukrainian victory is falling apart. And the latest is that in his desperation, Zelensky is ordering, I guess I would call them suicide attacks to try to assassinate President Putin with very little hope of success. So Bakhmut is gone. And as you said, it's got a different name now, which I haven't registered yet, but they're still calling it Bakhmut here. And he's still begging for money. He's going around in his dirty sweatshirt, never puts on a suit. And that's getting to Americans here. When he came to the Congress, Zelensky came to Congress, and he was just dressed in that regular olive drab with the emphasis on drab sweatshirt. And, we want a little more class when we come to America. come to come. But all he does is go to every country and coerce and beg and act. That's what he is. He's an actor. He's a comedian. So that's the way we feel here in the United States. More and more people are feeling that way. We've given too much money, $170 billion to Ukraine, a tremendous amount of ammunition, and they've squandered it. Listen, I'm really sad. I'm really sad and sorry to be so blunt, because I have Ukrainian and I have Russian friends for 40 years here in New York City. I've lived with Russians. I've had best friendships with Ukrainians, and I like them both, but it's like a cat and dog fight. You don't jump into it, or else you're going to get bitten and scratched. So that's the way I feel about it. And I pray that it's over soon. But it's all, the tragedy of it is that it was all by design. The deep state, Biden, that's what I call Joe Biden. Joe Biden, Chinese name. And his puppet has been creating chaos all over the world for years and years and years. And the jig is on. Everybody's realizing it. Everything is being exposed. Robert Kennedy Jr. has come up openly again. I'm glad, because I've been sending information for years about the CIA's role in the assassination of President Kennedy. I'd like to dedicate this program to memory, because his birthday would be Monday. He would have been 106 had he lived. And oh, how the world would have changed for the better if he had been allowed to speak on November 22nd, 1963 at the Dallas Trade Mart. Back to you.
Okay. Well, anybody that's our age is going to remember John F. Kennedy and the day and the moment he was shot in Dallas. And I have to agree with you. I think certainly that day marked a dramatic change in not only the world, but in the United States. I believe it was a coup, and we have not recovered from the coup. Every president since, every single one of them since, has just been a mannequin and a puppet in the hands of this.
Oh, sure. They were all gatekeepers.
cabal.
We call them gatekeepers.
Yeah,
Let me
that's a
show
good
you two
enough
books.
term.
Two books. This book, the most important book you've written, alongside with this book. This book was written in 2002 and told the whole story based on CIA documents where leaked by a Dane. His name was Robert Trumbull Hulley, and he was director of clandestine activities for the CIA. And he was in every meeting, every planning meeting for the assassination of President Kennedy in 1963. Between March and November, specifically November 14th was the last meeting, they enlisted the clandestine operations, the counterintelligence. They brought in the mafia. And this book tells the story. Primary target JFK. The man you see in the picture is the man who shot President Kennedy. His name is James Files. And I was led to him by a Virginia state trooper who contacted me in March and sent me the files. The CIA files. It was called Operation Zipper. And to do the whole in a couple of short sentences. After President Kennedy and Robert Kennedy stopped the invasion of Cuba and stopped the destruction of the world through nuclear holocaust, by stopping the invasion of Cuba by the US military, they forestalled a nuclear war between Russia, then Soviet Union, and the United States. And in an outrage, the CIA, the Department of Defense, got together and they had an extrajudicial trial. A court martial was held, an unconstitutional court martial, by the way. And they charged President Kennedy and Robert Kennedy with high treason. And they decreed the death sentence on them and called for public execution. So that put the plan into the works, and we got the machinery going. So they enlisted the mafia in Chicago, which was known as James, and he was a CIA operative and a mafia hitman in Chicago. So they got Charles Nicoletti, Johnny Roselli from the mafia, along with James Files, and he was one layer of the assassination teams, plural. Another layer was French assassins that were hired by Otto Skorzeny. He was one of the Nazis, preeminent Nazi in World War II. He was Hitler's top commando. And after World War II, he was enlisted by the CIA as one of what called the Paperclip Nazis. But he wasn't operating in the United States. They set him up in Madrid, Spain, with a front as an architect and an engineer. But what he was engineering were political assassinations of undesirable journalists and politicians in Europe, as well as setting up an assassination network using the mafia here in the United States. It just turns out we discovered Otto Skorzeny, famous for being the top commando. He famously parachuted with his gun to a mountain in Italy to rescue Mussolini after he was captured by the partisans. We found out that Skorzeny was in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963, and he was out hunting. And who was he with? He was out hunting with D.H. Byrd, the man who owned the Texas School Book Depository. So all this information came to me, and I was introduced to James Files, who spent 26 years in prison. And he had a conversion. He had a Christian conversion because he had two miraculous experiences. He says that Christ came to him in the jail, and that after the second one, he thought he was going to die. He said, "Why are you here?" Christ said, "I'm here to take you home." And James thought he died. Instead, it turned out that he was paroled. And after that parole, he converted. He married a lady named Pamela Ray. Together, they wrote that book. And I had the privilege of interviewing him on Palm Sunday and Easter Sunday, and he made a live on-the-air confession on my show, The Morningstar Report, which is on Revolution Radio, revolution.radio, the link or the URL. I'm on Studio A on Sundays at 3 o'clock and on Mondays at 10 p.m. on Studio B, Revolution.radio. So it's all come to a head. And after the movie that we spotlighted on our last program, it's called E.T.'s Among Us, Part 7, subtitled UFOs, the CIA, and the Assassination of JFK. It's just broken openly out. Everyone's talking about the issue in the JFK, including journalists. And I'm proud to say that Coast to Coast AM had me on the program last Tuesday, and the country knows. So it's a good time to be alive. It's a good time to stay alive. And that's what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to get people to stop believing the mass media news, stop believing the fairy tales that are telling us, stop believing that we are enemies. We should all be united. President Kennedy worked with Nikita Khrushchev to save the world from nuclear holocaust. And I would also like to remember Captain Vasily Arkanov, who was a Russian submarine captain who also helped to stop the world. They thought that World War III had broken out, and his the commissar, the other two people in the submarine, to launch nuclear veto, and he insisted that they shouldn't do it because they had not gotten orders. It's a long story, but let's remember them. Nikita Khrushchev, Vasily Arkanov, John F. Kennedy, and Robert F. Kennedy. Those four men worked together to save the world then, and we have to work together now. As I was telling you, we expect some bad things when governments get desperate internally and are facing power struggles. They try to turn the attention to an enemy without. But the enemy here is within, and American people know. Joe Biden is a traitor to our way of life, and he has intentionally been destroying our culture, our society, in order to impose on us the worst tyranny I expect, or I suspect. I don't expect it because we're going to beat it. But we're trying to impose a global government people with a Nazi, authoritarian, dictatorial superstructure as the governing body. And that's what we see in the New World Order, the WEF, the WHO, the so-called World Health Organization that wants to take over every country in the name of public health. That's another big lie. Back to you.
All right. So, Robert, I have to ask you this. First of all, I wasn't aware of this new information you've been revealing. I'll have to further look into that myself. But my question is, to me, everything that started with the assassination of Kennedy has led us to where we are at this very moment.
Yes,
Would you agree with that? I think it is
absolutely.
this cabal
Absolutely, I
that's
do.
behind it. Well, tell me about that. How do you see the connection?
Well, the connection to me now, after I've been studying this event nearly 60 years. November, it's going to be 60 years. I lived through the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I am a student of history, and I have found the documents that prove everything I'm going to tell you. We imported the worst Nazis imaginable into the United States. Was the fear of the Soviet Union, and well, Stalin was something to be feared. Stalin and the KGB and Schmerz, we know all about that. And they were really serious, serious, diabolical opponents. So the United States had no intelligence resources in Eastern Europe or in the Soviet Union. But the Germans had been monitoring it, vast networks in Eastern Europe and in the Soviet. So at the end of the war, we captured Reinhard Gehlen, master, the leader apparatus, espionage apparatus. And he was captured and he was put into an American prisoner of war camp. While in the prisoner of war camp, he appeared and asked them for permission basically to attempt a Trojan horse operation to save their lives, because it was understood between the Soviet Union and the American military, who were allies at the time, that they had to exchange lists of all the prisoners of war that they had taken over. Now, the atrocities that have been committed by the Nazis, and particularly in Ukraine, after the Germans, the Ukrainians killed more Jews than any other ethnic group. So Reinhard Gehlen knew that he was on a death to the Union. His presence would be demanded in Moscow for trial and execution. So he went to an American general, General Siebert, and he pitched offering his entire organization and his cadre of intelligence officers to the United States in exchange for protection. So the United States Army engaged in a non-constitutional negotiation with a foreign power and accepted his offer, and then presented the deal as fait accompli, a done deal, to President Truman. And that began the importation of this espionage group of Third Reich super spies. Well, at the same time, Werner von Braun, who was also a member of the SS and the Gestapo and the top rocket scientist, he also was in the same predicament. And so he and his group of scientists decided that their only hope to live, if they were captured by the Russians, they'd be dead. So they took their plans, their blueprints, their most important papers and experiments, they buried them in a German forest. They found out where the American army was, and they started heading toward the American lines, and they surrendered themselves to an American Army, U.S. Army company that was commanded by none other than Captain Clay Shaw. Clay Shaw, that was brought to trial by Jim Garrison in 1966 and 67, charging him with complicity in the assassination of President Kennedy. Clay Shaw was a CIA asset. He was a CIA operative. Assassination. The CIA went out to destroy him, to discredit him, used every major newspaper and every major news broadcast organization, ABC, CBS, NBC, Time Life magazine, to assassinate his character. But Jim Garrison was a good, honest, patriotic American, a former FBI agent and district attorney in New Orleans. And somebody asked me on the Coast to Coast program, somebody whose father worked with him said, how close was Jim Garrison to the truth? I told him 95 to 98%. When he said the CIA was involved in it, he was 100% correct. So we imported the Nazis, and slowly this Third Reich mentality went through the CIA and then branched out into other departments of the United States government. I'd like to point out that if you read Albert Speer's book, Inside the Third Reich, he points out that in 1943, they were desperate. Germany was losing. Albert Speer's mystical genius. And what he did, amalgamated the espionage and internal security apparatus of the Third Reich with the science and technology apparatus of their rocketry and advanced scientific research, like anti-gravity and flying saucers. Haunebu and the Vril craft, they were real. And so they amalgamated the two, and they gave it the name the middle work. So I often ask people, why do you think the Central Intelligence Agency is called Central Intelligence Agency and not United States Intelligence Agency? It is precisely because in the contract that Reinhard Gehlen negotiated with the U.S. Army, he stated specifically that his group, his Germans, did not work for the Americans, because if they were to work for the Americans, they would be considered traitors or quislings. After the Norwegian, quisling means traitor. It was a Norwegian who collaborated with the Nazis and established a Nazi government in Norway. So the word quisling is like Benedict Arnold. So that they would be considered quisling. So it was clear in their contract that they don't work for the Americans, they work with the Americans. And the clause says this, I memorized this. It said, if ever the interests of Germany should diverge from those of the United States, it is understood that our allegiance is first to Germany. The second clause that I memorized was that he demanded that their funding be invisible, black operations funding, that it should not appear on the congressional record, which leads us to how was the CIA going to fund these operations if they weren't getting funds from Congress to do so? Well, that's where the drug trafficking comes in. They got involved in global drug trafficking with the mafia, and the profits from those were funneled into the funding of the CIA black operations. And all of this is old news. The late Gary Webb broke it way back in the 1990s in a book called Dark Alliance. And George H.W. Bush became the leader of this global drug trafficking operation. One of the reasons why they killed John F. Kennedy is he wanted to pull out of Vietnam, but not only that, he wanted to stop the heroin trade, the heroin traffic out of the Golden Triangle. And when he did that, it was going to end the funding, the lucrative funding that not only the CIA, the French government was involved with the Corsican mafia who controlled the Golden Triangle in Laos and Cambodia. And so Kennedy in 1962 sent a general named General Edward Lansdale to Vietnam to tell them we got to shut down the heroin traffic. And so he came back and he was enlisted into the Kennedy assassination plot. He was the on-field commander. He was the man in Dealey Plaza who was overseeing the various assassination teams and coordinating them. General Edward Lansdale of the U.S. Air Force. And he is depicted in the movie JFK as the man who sent Mr. X to Antarctica. And Mr. X was Colonel Fletcher Crowdy. So we have all the information now. And you have it now. All you have to do is read Primary Target JFK by James File, Pamela Ray and James File, or Regicide by Gregory Douglas. So, as I like to say, the jig is up. People know the truth. And you're helping to get the truth out, Regis. Thank you for having me on the program. This is going to be Memorial Day to remember.
We'll come to that in a minute, hopefully. I had asked you if those events surrounding the assassination of Kennedy actually led up and increased to the point where we are today. I happen to believe that's the case. I'm very familiar with Operation Paperclip. A lot of people are now. And I'm reminded of a quote, General Walter Nornberger, who was von Braun's liaison to the rocket team. And he said at a missile conference in the United States in 1950, I didn't come to the United States to lose the Third World War. And I think what we are facing today with this United States sponsoring, paying, commanding these Nazis in Ukraine, we are inching ever closer to a Third World War. In fact, I think we are in the Third World War. The use of nuclear missiles so far have not been used. But I'm inclined to believe that all of this is connected very directly back to the John F. Kennedy assassination. So I want to shift gears a little bit now, Robert. I want to know 83 countries yesterday at the St. Petersburg Economic Conference. I think that it was the Economic Conference. They declared that they were all in favor of getting rid of the US dollar, 83 countries. It's well known that the BRICS Plus, and now I understand there's more than a dozen countries that want to join BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the ASEAN. These three organizations together and independently are working feverishly to establish their own international monetary fund and get away from the dollar. The difficulty only lies in what will that currency look like and what will it be based on. It'll be based on hard assets that each country has. Um, and so I think this is huge. I'm wondering what your take is on now with this connected to the economic crisis that is happening in the United States today. And I don't just mean the inability of the Democrats and the Republicans to come to terms with the debt limit. I'm talking about an economic collapse that lots of people, including Jamie Dimon and other presidents of the large banks in the United States, are saying recession and collapse is on the horizon. You're sitting there in New York City. What is your take on this
Yes,
economic situation? And what are Americans, are they experiencing at all?
everyone's experiencing it. I'm going through the worst financial crisis of my life. And I have to say that it seems to me, it's apparent to me that it is intentional. As I've said, what Joe Biden and the Democrats are trying to do is destroy our society, destroy our culture, our cornerstone, fundamental values, the same that Russia in 1960s. The methodology is the same. Destroy the culture, uh, social fabric, wreck the economy, and then impose the tyranny. What they're trying to do is trying to impose a new economic system on the United States, which is taking cash out of circulation, as has been done in England. This is the Great Reset. So they're trying to impose digital currency. This is the important thing about Ukraine. Ukraine is the experiment. Destroy, divide and conquer, then destroy, then rebuild. That's what the Great Reset. Build back better. They're talking. Before you build back better, understand. So Ukraine is the experiment where they've introduced digital currency, and they're working out the details of how to impose that on the rest of the Western world. Well, it's called Eastern world. Has seen has CERN. America has gone out of its way to destroy any country that tried to leave the petrodollar. That was the reason for the war in Iraq. That was the reason for the assassination of Muammar Gaddafi. Gaddafi was going to start an African dollar based on gold. He had a stable country. And because he was going to start to sell oil in national currencies and not based on the petrodollar, he was targeted by Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton in the State Department, working with Anthony Blinken, Ned Price, and Jake Sullivan, who are now in charge of the American State Department. They tried to do the same thing to Russia during the last couple of years. The whole purpose of overthrowing Poroshenko, who was a democratically elected president of Ukraine in 2014, George Soros moved in open society and started to divide people. They caused the Maidan Revolution, the Orange Revolution, and the Maidan Massacre. It's interesting that the Maidan Massacre, when they took the bodies for autopsies, they found bullets in both sets of victims that were coming from the same rifle. So there were snipers there who were sent to shoot people on both sides to create the bloodshed, to create the antagonism, to inflame the antagonism, and to bring down Poroshenko. Then they got a clown,
Actually, actually,
Zelensky. They
actually,
groomed this
that
clown.
was that was Yanukovych. Yanukovych.
Oh, I'm
Poroshenko
sorry,
replaced him.
Yanukovych. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for the correction. It's a long time since those events happened. So yes, Poroshenko replaced him as a pet. Then they replaced us over. So the point is that it was a consciously engineered coup d'etat and Hillary Clinton. And what threw the monkey wrench into the whole affair is the election of President Donald Trump. Otherwise, some breathing time to learn and see and study, to some of us to see what's really happening. Unfortunately, still, not a majority, but a large proportion of the United States is still under the MK Ultra mind control exercised by the Mockingbird media. Folks, I call it the Mockingbird media, after the name the CIA gave to an operation called Mockingbird, Operation Mockingbird, which was their plan to take over and influence every major newspaper, magazine, television station, and the film industry, which they have successfully accomplished over 70 years of time. That's why I report and the same phrases coming out. Finally, as Rob Morningstar, I have a series of tweets that show all of the talking heads on CNN, MSNBC, NBC, ABC, CBS, all of them saying the same things in exactly the same words, as they call it, as an echo chamber. So until you break away from mass media, you're not going to learn the truth, because it is mass deception. It's ironic, we used to point the finger at Pravda and as Izvestia as government organs of disinformation. And it seems like there has been a total satanic inversion. What was happening in Soviet Union in 1960 is happening now in the United States in 2023, using the same technique, face lies, and psychological manipulation. So
Yeah,
that's what the
there's a
situation
lot
is.
of
So
people.
these countries, the 83 countries you referred to, the 83 countries that you referred to, have bonded together because they fear the United States. It's been a big bully. It seems like every country that it had an alliance with has gone down. Right? Look what happened in Afghanistan. Look at what happened in Iraq. Look at what happened in Libya. Just those three examples. And now the turmoil in Africa, in Central Africa and South Africa, is being exacerbated by the Pan-African Islamic movement. So West Africa was a pretty stable region with French oversight. But when they overthrew Gaddafi, who was cooperating with the United States, his atomic weapons, going after the jihadis, he was uh, destroying Al Qaeda in the Maghreb. Well, when they toppled Gaddafi, that went into civil war, and the Western forces, the pro-Western forces, won. And now the jihadis have moved south into the South Sahara. And so Mali, Cameroon, um, Dahomey, all of those countries, they all went into the South Sahara. So they're having turmoil and war down there. And it's a war between Islam and Western civilization, because the United Nations is allied with Islam. They gave up on the idea of real democracy. It's just too unwieldy. It can't be controlled. It's unpredictable. People are fickle. They change their minds and they change their votes. As I pointed out in our last program, I named it communism in Afghanistan, called out in 2002 for all members of the Ummah, the group soul of Islam, to support communist insurrections wherever they may be, because communism and Islam are the same thing. So there you have my point of view. Why are they persecuting Christianity in the United States? The FBI is persecuting, is putting Christians on tagging them as white supremacists and domestic terrorists. That's the situation. But we know it's happening. And that makes a
Yeah,
big difference.
I agree. Another one of the United States' major allies, the Saudis, who have turned against the United States, completely changed the balance of power
Yes.
in the Middle East. The rapprochement with Iran, Syria is being brought back into the Arab League. So it's amazing what's happening, the pushback that's taking place. Um, I, I, I want to point out a couple of things that I agree with, but people are going to call us conspiracy nuts. You mentioned MK Ultra, the mind control project of the Fourth Reich, the CIA, and Operation Mockingbird to take over all of the not just mainstream media, but Hollywood itself, uh, programming all of it
Yes.
to program Americans to either believe it completely or to be completely delusional and lost about the whole thing. Um, I want to shift gears with the time we have left now because you mentioned to me earlier in the week in an email that 60,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate, an explosive, was
Yes.
missing in California. What do you think that's
Yes.
all about?
Yes. Well, we suspect that it was hijacked as a potential um, tool for conducting a false flag attack within the United States. Ammonium nitrate is the explosive that was used in the Murrah Federal Building explosion in Oklahoma City back in the late 1990s. A lot of people don't know why that building was targeted. It was targeted because it was the repository of all the FBI and BATF the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms that was involved in the Waco massacre. So, in the aftermath of the Waco massacre, there were congressional hearings held to investigate why did the people, many in such a horrible manner. So, all of that information was stored in the uh, Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. So an ammonium nitrate bomb was made and put into a truck, but there were bombs inside the building as well. I mean, the truck story is is part of the cover up. Yes, they blew up the truck, but when they studied the infrastructure that was left, there were explosions inside the building at the same time that the truck was blowing up outside. So ammonium nitrate in concentrated form mixed with certain other additives creates a very powerful bomb. So now 60,000 pounds of it has disappeared. Breitbart broke the story about 10 days ago. And so there was a train going from Wyoming to California to deliver this fertilizer. That's what ammonium nitrate is, basically fertilizing soils so that the plants grow more abundantly, but it can be used in evil ways. So now the problem is locating where did that ammonium nitrate go? 60. I was told that publicly they're saying 60,000 pounds, but it actually is closer to 75,000 pounds. So the suspicion is among us conspiracy theorists that a false flag attack is being planned. And I'm forewarning people in the United States and around the world, be ready, because this cabal enjoys conducting these operations, these attacks on significant days. September 11th was a very significant day historically. People don't know that September 11th, 2001 marked the of a great battle that occurred during the time of the Crusades. So stay alert and don't fall for the story. Now, I worry some of the false flag attacks that may happen may be blamed on Russia. That's my concern here. That the mass media Wurlitzer, that's an organ that just overwhelmed. Was given to it by a CIA clandestine operations named Frank Wisner. He said that he could play the Wurlitzer at any time and plant any story he wanted in any newspaper or multiplicity of magazines, newspapers, and broadcast stations. So my concern is that they may pull off a false flag attack, meaning an attack there may be such attacks, and that for them to have an excuse to jump into hell. That's what I call expanding the war in Ukraine. I call it Jump into Hell because it's the name of a movie that was made by the French in 1954 depicting the fall of Dien Bien Phu in Vietnam. The French were defeated in Vietnam and they laid Vietnam on our laps. Vietnam was not our problem. The French controlled Indochina and they lost the Vietnam War, phase one, to the communists at Dien Bien Phu. So they made a movie called Jump into Hell, which is actually what Vietnam turned into. So I fear that the deep state, the CIA, wants to expand the war in Ukraine to turn it into another Vietnam, into another long, drawn, ongoing war that they will exploit for political purposes, propaganda, but also to keep feeding the military-industrial complex. But the world is tired of that. And so I forewarn my fellow Americans and my fellow citizens of the world not to fall into the trap. We are not each other's enemies. We should see each other's brothers and each other's keepers. So I ask the people of Russia and Ukraine to reconcile themselves to each other, to put down the animosity, antipathy, and to realize that you've all been fooled. As I said, lived through the Cuban crisis. I saw John F. Kennedy forewarn us that there would be no victor in a nuclear war. He said, we cannot engage in a war in which the fruits of victory would be but ashes in the victor's mouth. Very powerful statement. I've never forgotten it from the moment I heard it that October in 1960. About tactical nuclear weapons and winning a war with tactical nuclear weapons is insane. You cannot contain the atomic demon. Once the genie is out of the bottle, it cannot be put back. So we must all work together to stop this conflict. We must not be fooled again, as the Who song goes. We won't be fooled again. So I hope that you're listening and take conspiracy theories seriously. Go to YouTube and look for something that's called 10 conspiracy theories that turned out to be true. So that's what we're living through. You have to be wise enough. Jesus said, be as wise as a serpent and as harmless as a dove. We must be both to survive.
Yeah,
Back
I
to you.
think. Thank you. I think that well, it's 80% of the rest of the world recognizes what is going on. It is not just pointing the finger at America. The rest of the world, I think, knows that America and those in charge in America are only the tools and the gatekeepers, as you said in the beginning of the show. I think these other countries,
Yes.
when they talk about a multipolar world, a multilateral world, respecting the strict observance of international law, not the United States or the globalists, uh, their own made up world order, uh, but the strict
Mhm.
observance of the UN Charter, the sovereignty of all peoples, of every nation, regardless of how large or how small. And it's based on cooperation, not confrontation. It's based on diplomacy, not this hyper rhetoric of belligerency. And I think this is the hope. I believe this is the hope against this evil. And as President Putin called it, satanic influence that's coming from what he
Yes.
calls the United States and the collective West. That's as good a description as one can say. It is evil, it is satanic. And whether people are Christians or not, or believers in Jesus, uh, I think it's important for all people to recognize that what's at stake is our basic humanity. In my opinion, that's what Jesus came
Yes.
to teach us, to love, to forgive, to reach out to the poor and the homeless and the ill. That's the radical Jesus. And I think that
Yes.
it's really important that we and the rest of the world cling to those values that make us human. Your final thoughts, Robert, before we finish.
Okay. I'm glad you brought this up because what you're talking about when you talk about Jesus, you're talking about this concept of the Christ. And at the same time, on this planet, there's been an ongoing war for 2,000 years between the exponents and the followers of the Christ principle and the Antichrist. And right now, it's come to a critical point. You said earlier that you pointed out that Saudi Arabia has reconciled itself with Iran. Why? The the hidden hand, the gray presence. Israel is in desperate straits, and part of the take of the United States foreign policy has to do in large part with role in conquering, with this state inviting and conquering diplomatically and economically through the rest of the world. Israel is in great crisis right now, internally and externally. The point of the Ukrainian war is the expansion of Israel. They've been thwarted. They wanted to expand through Syria. Israel follows the same philosophy that Hitler did because politically and ideologically, Zionism and Nazism are really the same thing. Zionists were allowed to stay in Germany while most of the other Jews were being persecuted and expelled. And when Menachem Begin took over the country, or I should say, even earlier, uh, the Stern Gang, Avram Stern was the leader of this freedom fighters, they call them. Other people call them terrorists, who blew up the King David Hotel to expel the British. He wrote to Stalin asking for military aid to help him fight the British. And he said that his goal was to establish a government in Israel, this country to be, that was a combination of communism and fascism. And that's exactly what I've described to you as the plan for the global government instituted by the United Nations. Now, Israel needs to expand, its population is growing, but they also have insight that the Ashkenazi sect of Judaism originated in Ukraine. They are also known as Khazaarians. And so they are looking to Ukraine as the next for migration. As I've said before, migration is a way to destabilize certain countries. And that's part of the plan, Pan Europa, that was written by Richard Kalergi. So the destruction of Ukraine also has an element of revenge. As I said, after the Germans, Ukrainians killed more Jews in World War II than any other country. There were 33,000 Jews murdered in Babi Yar in Ukraine. And so this idea of getting even is a big punishing Ukrainians for what was done in World War II. So let's not ignore the influence of Israel in these geopolitical chess games that are going on. So if are we time here? I think we're close. So I would like to go back to John F. Kennedy and his exhortation to all of us during his inaugural speech. He said to us, "With a good conscience, our only sure reward, with God, the final judge of our deeds, let us go forth to leave the land we love, knowing that with his blessing and his help, God's work on earth must truly be our own." So that's what we're being asked to do. We're doing God's work, not religiously, not theologically, just humanely. And we must help save the human race, just as men. John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Nikita Khrushchev, Vasily Arkanov did so in 1962. The enemy, the enemy is a demonic entity. He wants to see humanity destroy itself. That'll be my closing.
Yeah. And I'm reminded of the words of Robert Oppenheimer, one of the inventors of the atom bomb. He said after the first test at Alamogordo, he quoted from the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death,
Yes.
the destroyer of worlds." This is what we're up against. Robert, I want to thank you so much for
Yes.
coming on the show. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.